The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 16th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then Jesus sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Figure I should get a little bit more use out of these, right? I can't see my sermon, but I also can't see anyone sleeping, so that's a good thing. Did everyone have a chance to stop and see the eclipse this past Monday? A lot of you did. That's good. Some said it was a once-in-a-lifetime event for this to happen so close. But then we hear there's another one happening in, 2024 that's coming near St. Louis. And so we're going to start calling them infrequent. And don't forget that there's this disclaimer on your glasses that said you have to throw them away after 3 years. So we all get to buy new glasses. But this past Monday, I do want to give a shout out to the Cole Camp Library. They put on a really great program that day for folks to come and learn and experience the eclipse locally. It was good community, it was good learning, and they gave out free glasses. So that was cool. But we had friends come in to visit us that day, Kim and I, and they also had a newborn baby. And so since all of us were kind of juggling kids and feeding and everything, we left the library and we came back to the house after the eclipse had started. And so when we got home, I looked over into the park, and the park here was full of people staring up into the sky, waiting for this eclipse. And so you said you all saw it. You know, it got darker, it got cooler outside, the insects started chirping, the street lights came on. It was really cool, incredible to be out there. But of course, just like that, the eclipse passed and the light started coming back. I was still staring up into the sky, watching the eclipse kind of lose its totality when I realized that there was something else around us occurring. Some of the people who were in the park were already leaving. The streetlights hadn't even turned off yet, and there were cars already pulling away from watching the eclipse. Some of the people who had been camped out for this experience, this whole time that we had seen them, they decided the experience was over for them, when really the eclipse was only halfway done. I mean, I understand that not everyone is afforded all kinds of time to just sit around and stare into the sky like you think I do most of the week. I'm not trying to be critical of their decisions or your decisions. If you can't watch the whole thing, you can't watch the whole thing. I mean, I confess, we were actually in and out of the house throughout the thing, and we did leave before it was totally done to go to something else. But as you can probably tell, this got me wondering about what else there is in this world and in our lives that we may not take the time to fully engage in or experience, or from which we might leave a little early. It's probably not a shock for me to say that in this current political climate and this current society that we're in, it's very easy to become negative. I think most of us, if not all of us, are probably quite good at being negative. We don't have much of a problem indicating the things that we're against. It gets difficult, though, when we try to indicate the things that we are for. I think I started thinking about all this when a friend of mine, who's also a pastor, posted a sentiment like this on his Facebook page a couple weeks ago. Fine, I borrowed the idea from him. But he was writing this day about how easy it is to share the things that we are against, or the things that we disagree with. So he was going to take the time to be intentional, especially on Facebook, and share those things and stating for himself what he is for. Not just politically, but personally, maybe even religiously. And I thought, good for him. Glad someone else is doing that. So these past few weeks, as I said, have been a little busy, so I haven't been able to tune into much of anything outside of my little bubble. So I went back to see what he had posted. And you know what he wrote on there? Nothing. It's been weeks, and he hasn't written a thing. I hope he doesn't watch my sermons. Which got me, of course, thinking again, what are we for? Why is it so difficult for us to take a little bit of time and state what we believe in? What do I believe in? Personally? Politically? Faithfully? Or can all of those maybe be the same thing? In our gospel reading today, Jesus asks a simple question. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Simple, right? And we heard what the disciples said. Well, we've heard some say you're John the Baptist, and others say it's Elijah, and some say Jeremiah, or some say, I don't know, any of the prophets. And Jesus kind of says, okay, but who do you say that I am? Tell me for yourself. Who am I? Why do you keep following me? You've got to have a good reason, don't you? So maybe that's our question today. Who do we say that Jesus is? Can each of us express for ourselves why we're here or why we're following Jesus? Are we only here for the featured event, like those 2 minutes and 37 seconds that the eclipse was in its totality? Or can we be fully present to the whole experience, from the moment the slightest sliver of moon starts encroaching on the sun to the moment that the moon is completely out of the way? Sometimes it feels like we do that when the ways we follow Jesus. We might be really fond of that part about Jesus where he forgives our sins, but we don't pay much attention to the parts where he turns over the tables in the temples, and he eats with tax collectors and prostitutes, and he heals lepers, and he generally upsets the status quo. We might describe Jesus as the one in whom we've obtained eternal salvation, but then we gloss over that whole thing about taking up our crosses and following. Who do you say that I am? In our gospel story, we can't say whether Jesus' question was met with this long, silent pause from the disciples sitting there with blank stares, or if Simon and Peter spoke up really quickly when he asked the question. But apparently the answer was good enough for Jesus. You, Jesus, are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Which, of course, made Jesus happy. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Nailed it. In fact, it was such a good answer that Jesus goes on to promise that the church itself will be built on the foundation of that belief. So again, the question, who do you say that I am? Doesn't it seem like we should really have an answer for that, so that we ourselves have a firm foundation to build literally all the rest of our beliefs on? Instead of complaining that the church pews aren't as full as they were 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 years ago, let's answer the question, who do you say that I am? So that when someone asks why they should come to church, you can say more than just, oh, it's nice, or because you should, you really should. But we can actually tell them what God is up to in your life and in this world and in this church. Who do you say that I am? Our answer is important. mean, think about the events in Charlottesville, for example. I bet that the one person who was carrying a Nazi flag and one person who was carrying a sign that says Black Lives Matter, they could both confess to being Christian. But who is Jesus for each of them? When it comes to dealing with the death of a loved one person might confess that this disease is just part of God's will, where someone else might say that death stinks. And both of them confess to be followers of Jesus. Who is Jesus for them? When we see destruction from natural disasters like what's going on in Louisiana and Texas, I've heard some Christians say that, oh, God is punishing them for their wicked ways. And I've heard some Christians say that, no, God is in the middle of this storm walking with those who suffer. Who then is Jesus for any of those Christians? Who do you say that I am? I was really hoping that I could, but I'm guessing at this point I can't walk away from this sermon without actually answering the question myself. So for me, and again, this is me personally, and this answer is constantly reshaped and reformed, probably daily. But for me, God is love. So Jesus is literally the embodiment of that love. Jesus is the flesh and the blood, the seen with our own eyes, the portrayal of who God is. So that God's not some just abstract deity, but is someone or something that we see among us. Jesus is the joy of new life. Jesus is the comfort we find in our suffering and in our grief. He's the challenge we experience when we get too comfortable. He's the dignity that every human being should be afforded. He's hope for the hopeless, strength for the fearful, love for the lonely. Jesus is God in the flesh. Jesus is the Savior of this world. I, of course, have personal experiences that can accompany each of those statements, but I don't need to share those. But those experiences and this confession all give me a foundation for how I can view everything else going on in this world. And I know you have experiences and you have confessions that build your own foundations so that you can also confess and believe what's going on in this world. So again, who do you say that I am? Amen.